Hello and welcome to Wabanaki Today. I'm your host, Donna Loring. Wabanaki is an Algonquian word meaning people of the dawn. The Wabanaki formed a confederacy that included 4 tribes. They live in Maine and Canada. Borders do not belong to Wabanaki, but are made by the United States and Canada. We have 4 Wabanaki tribes, and they consist of Penobscot, Passamaquoddy, Micmac, and Maliseet. Wabanaki Today is a show that brings Wabanaki issues and stories to you directly from the Wabanaki people and people of interest. There will be no spin and no apologies. This show is the only show in the state of Maine that speaks truth to power from a Wabanaki perspective and from behind the white curtain that isolates us from the rest of Indian country. We'll be addressing issues such as sovereignty, human and civil rights, social justice, historical issues, and much more. I am proud to introduce the first show of Wabanaki Today. Welcome to the show, Kirk.
Thank you, Donna, and again, it's always a privilege. Wish we were talking about other things, but...
Yeah, me too. So, for people who are not familiar with the case, could you give us some background on it?
Sure. So, back in 2012, after a few years, at least 4 years of kind of a building of this heated debate about who got to enforce the sustenance-based fishing rights of the tribe, including hunting, trapping, and the taking of wildlife, which basically started to bubble a little bit over duck permits and hunters in the river and in the tribe asking for a permit process around that and implementing one to manage that wildlife and to understand what was being taken, where that's a sustenance resource. So, and it really was as petty as that. And then it started to escalate into really just this struggle for control. And the state took the position in 2012 after pressure kind of from the ground up. 1 or 2 citizens to a local game warden to the Commissioner of Inland Fisheries and Wildlife, and then an opinion was asked for through the Maine Attorney General's office. So we received a letter in 2012 basically saying that it was the position of the state that the tribe's rights were on the islands only and didn't exist within the river, which basically nullified the tribe's Aboriginal fishing rights and recognized fishing rights both in treaty and reaffirmed through the Settlement Act. So we took that as a real shot across the bow to try to create a controversy. They wanted a response from us in the letter and felt like that would have gave them their controversy and they would have gotten ahead of us in terms of filing in a state court. So the tribe had to defend itself in the most proper way possible, and you know, we're a federally recognized tribe and we believe that federal Indian law applies to us totally, and that the trust responsibility of the United States was applicable here. So we immediately filed in federal court, a federal district court, for the protection of the tribe's sustenance-based rights.
So this court process, I mean, it seems like it's we've been through this before, many times, right?
Exactly.
So we basically saw this coming and decided just to jump ahead of them with, get it into federal court, right?
Yeah. And so, the shame of that is that, as you mentioned, is I think we are well over a dozen litigation processes since the signing of the Maine Indian Land Claim Settlement, which is evidence of the state's approach towards these issues. Now, we filed suit, and they'll continue to say, this was the tribe that brought suit, not us. But you can't issue a 2-paragraph opinion basically forcing a territorial removal of the tribe, taking away its cultural identity and an ancient practice that is core to the cultural identity of Penobscot people. So we weren't the aggressor on this, or we're not the aggressor. We really just felt like we had to protect ourselves. So we find ourselves in these venues way too often, having to defend ourselves with very, very complicated language, very ambiguous language, which in by itself is a federal Indian law canons of construction problem for the tribes of Maine. So, and the court has been kind of all over the place, not just this court this time, but courts have been all over the place in terms of how to apply federal Indian law in those ambiguous languages, which are always supposed to favor tribes. And the Supreme Court has ruled on that against Settlement Act language. So, as you know, the tribe is often on the short end of the stick of these decisions, and every decision that goes against the tribe makes the next case harder and harder. So yeah, I think, and when you look at the framework of the Maine Indian Land Claim Settlement, it's my personal opinion that, and the opinion of many others, that this act has been violated and gone against over and over and over to the benefit of the state of Maine. And I think we're now to a place where we need kind of a multi-pronged approach in terms of how we're going to address this. The court is one avenue, and those legalities have to be dealt with there. But there's also a congressional approach and also a citizen-based approach where we work to change hearts and minds of institutions, but also educate Maine citizens about the reality of the status of the tribes of Maine and what's been happening to us, how that's affected health disparities, economic disparities, educational outcome disparities, and all of those things. And now, we're supposed to just sit back and take, after all of that, the attempted obliteration of our cultural practices is just not going to be acceptable.
Yeah, it seems like very strange in this day and age that they're still trying to do this to, a whole community of people, a whole race of people. It seems to me like Maine is sometimes a lot like Alabama back in the 50s and 60s from their approach and some of the things that they've done to us and continue to do.
Yeah, it's the institution that is state government, and what we're seeing throughout this case is Maine citizens have grown. They've evolved. They understand the value of the tribes of Maine, the cultural history of the tribes of Maine, and as you know, we've received overwhelming support in this case from multiple organizations, state citizens, etc. And it's getting national attention. But the institution of state government is not evolving, and we have to remember we're 4 decades from being total wards of the state, where the late 1960s tribal members were finally recognized as citizens in terms of being able to vote. So we're very much in our infancy in this new kind of sovereign era for the tribes, and it's not being received very well within state government. And so those mindsets of the institution are just critically hard, just extremely hard to change. So, but at the end of the day, what we try to tell people there is that, it is made up of human beings, the decision makers, and it's what part of history do people want to be on. And so, unfortunately, decision makers have chosen to continue down the path of trying to remove any remnants of tribal authority, of a distinct political entity within the state of Maine that has a responsibility to its territory and people. And so we, this cannot be acceptable to the international community. It can't be acceptable to the United States. And what the United States has said in this case, and members of Congress, by the way, is that this is a grossly inadequate representation of how government-to-government relationships are supposed to work. So we're going to continue to go down multiple roads and try to rectify these things.
Yeah, well, I mean, it's just no surprise when you look at what's happening now in state government. You look at our governor, you know, some of the remarks that he said and how Maine, him being the governor of Maine, has made national and international news with his racist comments. And, you know, and these are about African American people, you know, and it's almost like Native people are like not even on the radar screen here.
Yeah, we're not even afforded the negative comments.
Exactly.
But I think,
Exactly.
but I think that you know, it's indicative of. I mean, if that's being said publicly, you can imagine what those conversations are like in other arenas, more private. So so again, I just think it's indicative of where the mindset of leadership within state government is in terms of, you know, this drug problem is not a race problem in Maine. It's a problem everywhere, and I would probably dare say that that the non-people of color have just as much responsibility in this as anyone else. And I think, you know, not to get too much into his politics or his comment, but I mean, I just think that when I first saw that, it's really like it puts this light on Maine that Maine is starting to get a reputation for anyway with its indigenous people, and that is that you know, we're a predominantly white state, and there's no political ramifications for acting this way, and we're going to take a hard line when it comes to the rights of minority people, and I think nobody's been at the receiving end of that more than the tribes here.